Hi everyone, welcome to JW3 Online. We're going to wait a couple of minutes for a few of the other guests for this evening's event to join us, but welcome. We're really glad to have you, see some familiar faces, see some new faces. While you wait, we'd love to know where everyone is from. So if you want to change your name, your username to the city that you're in right now. I think we've got quite an international audience tonight, and we're really excited to see who and where you are at. DC, Glasgow, London, Maryland, Wash DC, Philadelphia. Amazing. If you've just joined, write in your name where you're at, where you're from, what city you're in at the moment. We'd love to hear who's in the room.
It's nice to see lots of friendly faces. Welcome. And it's lovely to see such a Agahozo-Shalom crowd in the house. Welcome.
Yes. All right, so we're going to start. I hope you're all here for the Responsibility Roundtables with JW3 and OLAM. I'm really excited to welcome you here tonight to JW3 Online. This is JW3 and OLAM's second Responsibility Roundtable. I'm Joe Hyman. I'm the young JW3 programmer. And if you haven't been to JW3 in person, we're looking forward to welcoming you all from around the world to come to London in September when we reopen our building to the public with an exciting array of programs. And we've been working over the past few weeks to make that happen, and I'm really excited about it. If you haven't ever interacted with us before, we are the only cross-communal Jewish community and art centre in the UK. And we do loads of different things, loads of different programs, from classes and courses to speaker events, performances, arts and culture events. Over lockdown, we've done a huge range of different things, from events like this, talking about global responsibility, to a Black Lives Matter Everywhere event, events for Pride and LGBTQ people, and loads of different other things that everyone is welcome to come to. We're really excited to be doing this event on global Jewish responsibility. One of our values is chesed, kindness, and this is kind of one of the manifestations of that. And we're really excited to be doing this with OLAM and talking about the importance of ethical development, not just development, but ethical and responsible development, and how that ties in to the anti-racism movement that's happening in the current moment. I'm really excited to also share with you that JW3 will be hosting, in continuation with its anti-racist work, an allyship workshop in early September, which I'll share a link in the chat now. But before, after I do that, I'll pass over to the wonderful Graham from OLAM, who will tell you a bit more about the structure of this evening and our wonderful speakers. So that's enough from me. Graham, go for it.
Good evening, everyone. Lovely to be here with you. Thank you for coming to this Responsibility Roundtable. For those of you who don't know, OLAM is the umbrella organization of Jewish and Israeli international development, humanitarian aid, and global volunteering organizations around the world. There are 50 organizations, over 50 organizations now, I should say, around the world. And in the UK, we're lucky to have 3. Tonight, as Joe said, is the second in this series. There's another one in September, so look out for that, which will be live in a couple of weeks. My name is Graham Carpenter. I'm the UK Community Manager for OLAM. So it's my job to engage the British Jewish community as much as I can in this work. And yeah, I'm really excited to be running this discussion tonight where we're talking about ethical approaches to development. So we are here, we've planned the webinar until 9 o'clock. And I'll just talk about the structure quickly, which is that firstly, in a minute, I'm going to introduce our 3 fantastic speakers for tonight. And they're going to talk a little bit about the work that they do and their views on this topic. Then we're going to go to some breakout rooms and let you guys do a bit of chatting amongst yourselves and share your reactions to what they say. And if you're happy to share your own personal experiences. And then we'll come back and do some more of a panel style discussion with our speakers. And during that, we'll be asking you to submit questions in the chat. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to where this discussion goes. So we have an hour and a half, but our preparation call with the speakers earlier in the week revealed that there are lots of different directions that this conversation could go, and likely so much more than we could probably fit in this evening. So as I said, we're gonna let our speakers take the floor and share their thoughts for a couple of minutes to set the scene, to lay the context of the discussion for the rest of the evening. So our 3 speakers tonight are JC. JC, give us a wave. Give us a wave, JC. Hello, JC. They are Hannah. Hannah, give us a wave. Thank you. And Mireille, give us a wave. Perfect. So I'm going to go one by one and ask them each to introduce themselves and their work and yeah, talk a bit about their thoughts on the issue. We're going to start with Mireille Flores. Mireille is the Humanitarian Programs Director for World Jewish Relief. Mireille, please unmute, introduce yourself and share for a couple of minutes your thoughts on the current state of the aid and development sector and how you think it needs to start by looking a bit more inwards.
Sure, thanks, Graham, and good evening, everybody. Oh, you changed something here. Now I can only see myself. Joe, I don't want to see myself. It's okay to put it back into the. Oh, now I can see Graham. Sorry.
You can put on gallery view, Mireille.
I can.
Yeah, you can just click gallery view.
It's much better. I'd rather see everyone else's faces, you know, rather than my own. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and share some thoughts. As Graham was saying, I am the head of humanitarian programs at World Jewish Relief. World Jewish Relief is a humanitarian and development agency based in London, here in the UK. And so we do work for Jewish communities, but also for non-Jewish communities. In my case, my programs are those for international disaster and emergency responses all throughout the world. And of course, it's non-specific to Jewish communities, but we do have the other side to the organization as well. So yeah, I mean, just a little bit about me. I am Mireille Flores, and as my name probably can say, I'm Latin American. I'm a relatively young-ish woman with about sort of 10 years of experience in the humanitarian and development sector. For tonight, I would just like to share a few thoughts on the sort of state, in the current state of the humanitarian development sector when it comes to race and when it comes to power dynamics, as well as the idea of white supremacy, as we were discussing with the rest of the panel. So I mean, we can go into this for so long, but I actually will be, or like to have much more discussions and questions. So I'll just put a few thoughts out there and then get your thoughts or let the other panelists go. So the aid sector or the international development sector, I mean, both kind of similar yet slightly different, but when it comes to the idea of sort of race and power dynamics and the idea of white supremacy, all of the, when we talk about racism, you know, we should assume that these are embedded in structures of power dynamics. And so logically, we should conclude that we as a sector, as our organizations, are not immune to it. And I think that's the first thought I would like to make, is the fact that organizationally speaking, sectorally speaking, we need to start by acknowledging that we are not immune to these trends and to these ideas of power dynamics, race and racism. And so, however, because of the nature of our work and because of the international humanitarian sectors all about equality, inclusion, and you know, we're assisting everyone without any belief on race or religion, etc. Right? As a sector, I feel like sometimes we're blind, and as organizations, sometimes we're blind just because we know that what we're trying to do is good and what we're achieving is good and our intentions are good. However, looking internally, often these ideas of inclusion or equality or inclusivity in general are not transformed within our organizations and within the sector. A small example of that, I'm not sure how familiar you may be with the idea of localization in the aid and the humanitarian sector, but it's the idea that the power dynamics, the budgets, the decisions and the structures will move more towards the countries that are recipients of aid. This idea of localization was kind of like a commitment in general from various countries in the 2016 Grand Bargain Agreement in Turkey. And the idea was that donors were going to give money directly to local organizations, and therefore local organizations will be able to have better and more power about their decisions, about how they do their expenditure, and just more power in general in terms of who they hire and so on. Now, this localization idea is fantastic in paper and it sets out all the right things. However, when it comes to reality, that's still not achieved, that's still not progressing, that's still not happening. And it's a very minimum achievement that the sector have had in the idea of shifting the power. So when we're talking about race and when we're talking about racism, or when we're talking about white supremacy or any sort of type of supremacy, we're talking about power, right? So the idea of localization was to shift the power. In this case, the power means money. The power means taking decisions in the aid sector. And so the idea of shifting this is fantastic. However, we as a sector are still not prepared to let go. And we're not prepared to let go because we have become so professionalized and we have this amazing, massive monitoring evaluation grids and risks, and you know, we need everything in English, and you know, God forbid if you kind of like just type something wrong or like your reports are up not to standard. And who can do this? Who can do all of this reporting, and who can do all of these M&E grids and XYZ, all of these requirements that are donor led? Well, normally these are people that have had high levels of studies, that have had high levels of privilege in their countries, that normally speak very good English, and normally look very white. So it's not a coincidence that then you end up in positions in countries where we're sending aid to, where all the powers and all the decisions are making by higher levels of white, often men, often middle to older age. And so when we have this I suppose this profile, it's very difficult to say, oh, we're being very inclusive as a sector, and we're not kind of like walking the talk of what we should be set out to do. So I mean, there are a few things that I think that we can do as a sector. One of them, yeah, commit to localization, but actually make it happen. Put the money where it's going to be spent, and maybe let people make their decisions. You know, like there is no one better than someone that is local, that knows what's going on, to make the decisions. However, money comes from here, so we don't want to let go so much on those decisions. We also want to have a say on those, right? But when it comes to leadership, one of the things that the sector can do is to ensure that this leadership doesn't look just one color, it doesn't look just one gender, it doesn't look just one type of profile, but actually it looks diverse. It looks from within. We are being inclusive, not just of race, but also of abilities and disabilities, of colors, of religion, and so on. So that's one of the things that can be done, but also this idea of organizations building bridges between headquarters and field level. You know, there's normally this huge disconnect between both, but this idea of actually building bridges in which one doesn't feel like the other one is bossing them around, but actually where both can have this symbiosis of where we're here to collaborate, we're here to sort of support and see value on each other. I will say as well on things like, I guess on when it comes to recruitment of your own organizations, and this doesn't have to be international development only, when it comes to recruitment, having those layers of looking into not necessarily of a CV of someone or a name of someone, but actually getting your recruitment done with based on abilities as opposed on names or CVs or things that can distinctively make your privilege something that someone will choose you from. For example, your name or the private schools that you might have gone to, etc. So that will be something that the sector can do or get better at. Another, I guess another area, it's like when you, I don't know if you have experienced this, but a lot of the time for the international sector, you always have to have some degree of volunteering experience, particularly in the global south, right? Like, or you should, I don't know, spend 3 years of your life doing internships in XYZ organizations. But I mean, who can actually do that if you don't have money? Who can actually, so you end up with a sector that even from the beginning, from the very sort of start of people building their careers in the sector, you actually have to have a little bit of money, or parents that have a little bit of money to support you. And normally this doesn't necessarily correlate with diversity on people of colors. So I think the setup right from the beginning needs to sort of be rethought, like shifted, and so that international development and aid workers from the very beginning are diverse and not just this one size fits all. There are various, I think I just had like a few minutes, so I will just stop soon, and I'm more interested into sharing more thoughts if people have more questions afterwards. But one message, I guess, that I wanted to, for you to take away is that, we are set up to do good. We are set up to have an impact in people's lives. However, that doesn't mean that internally we don't have, as a sector, as organizations, we don't have issues of race or inequalities within our own sector, as good as we may want to be. So I'll leave that there, Graham. I don't know if I took too much time.
Thank you, Mireille. No, that was great. Thank you so much already for us to grapple with and unpick. And I just remind everyone of the structure that once we've heard from JC and Hannah, we're going to go to some breakout rooms. So start thinking to yourselves, everyone who's on the call, you know, what are my thoughts on the issues that are being brought up, and how do I perceive it, and what are my experiences of them in the past. I'm going to move us on to hear from JC. JC Nkulikiyimfura is the, I hope I said it right, JC. Yes, JC is the director of the Agahozo-Shalom Youth Village in Rwanda. And as I said earlier, it's great to see a great ASYV crowd on the call. Welcome. And JC, please tell us a little bit about what the village is, and also your experiences on the differences between aid and partnership that the village engages with, and you know how the village approaches bringing all the volunteers and visitors that it does, and your experiences of, you know, the narratives and perceptions that come with that.
Thank you so much, Graham. It's such an honor to be here, to be speaking to everyone tonight. So I'm JC, or Jean-Claude Nkulikiyimfura. I'm from Rwanda. I'm one of those who returned to my country after the genocide against the Tutsi. And many of us had been refugees, so we were not allowed to be in our country, and those who were in the country died. So I'm extremely proud to say that in a few months, maybe 6-7 months, I have been at Agahozo-Shalom for about 10 years. And Agahozo-Shalom was built as a response to the genocide. So I'll tell you a little bit about the story of ASYV, but at the same time trying to link in the whole, within the discussion of aid versus partnership. And I'll talk a little bit about Anne Heyman and her approach to how she decided to start the village. She learned about Agahozo-Shalom at a talk about the genocide, and she asked what is the biggest problem facing Rwanda. I mean, her husband asked that question, and the person said the staggering number of orphans. And without a systemic solution to addressing this issue, this country will never develop. And so she was intrigued, and the first approach, she traveled to Rwanda to learn about the country, to learn about the history, to learn, to understand what are the gaps that are in the country. The first thing she saw is that orphans were being taken care of by the government, and kids were living in orphanages and being provided scholarships to go to school. NGOs were also providing scholarships. There was nothing like a model, the model of a youth village, and that's where she identified a gap. And she started studying, trying to understand if a youth village could fit in Rwanda. And I think the genius of Anne, the founder, was to say, I'm going to study this model, but I'm coming back to take members, Rwandans, and take them to Israel. She picked people from the different types of government agencies, Ministry of Gender and Family Promotion, Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Youth, Ministry of Education. And she took pretty much a group of about 12 people, and sent them to Israel to study this model. And after 3 months of teaching that model, she asked them, can this be replicated within the context of Rwanda? And if there's things to change, what would you like to change? And it was a discussion that took place. And immediately after, that's how the village was built. And to date, I would say one of the big decisions she also took is like, this village had to be led by Rwandans, because they will be the best, the most appropriate people to sort of serve the young people over there. And so that also enabled this model to fit and to sort of be recalibrated within the context and the culture and the realities of Rwanda. I think that's something that was genius on the part of Anne and the board that supported, the board and the donors that supported them. And also the other notion of bringing volunteers and visitors to the village. Our founder used to say, if we cannot take our kids to the world, we can bring the world to them. And that's also a way to embrace another culture that you don't necessarily know, and also learn to interact with people who do not have the same type of realities as you do. And so this is something we really embrace at the village. It enables our kids to sort of learn from others, but also from others to learn from our kids. And so when we have all sorts of volunteer programs, but some of which are year-long programs, and also we have a visitors program, and our goal is, while people come, and I mean, the village is founded on the principles of Tikkun Halev and Tikkun Olam, and building the community and making this world a better place. And so while people come to sort of make our own community better, it's also on us to make sure that when they leave Agahozo-Shalom, they will have also learned a thing or two. So this, to me, is a great model for partnership. It's a great model, to me, that is different from what you would necessarily, we sometimes loosely call as aid. Aid is when, mostly when somebody comes and dumps something on you, sometimes even something that you do not need. We do receive sometimes people who want to tell us like, oh, Agahozo-Shalom, oh, how about you build a pool and tennis courts and stuff like this? Like, yes, we love that, but that's not what we need right now. We probably need something else that is not a pool or some tennis courts. And so when people are able to understand what you need to sort of advance advance and reach to your goals, I think this is where the notion of partnership and the notion of investment kicks in, and people are able to sort of have some common goals. Maybe I'll stop from here, and then we can take the discussion after. Thank you.
JC, thank you. I was fortunate enough to visit the village in February and really experience that two-way partnership that you spoke about, and certainly came away with extremely valuable learnings. So thank you. Going to move us on to Hannah, our third speaker of the evening. Hannah Gaventa. Hannah, I actually never got what your position is at Palladium, so you're going to have to tell us yourself. I'm sorry I'm not introducing it. But you are you're also very experienced in working for lots of Jewish development organizations as well. So please let us know, your current role, some of the other places that you've worked, and then your thoughts on the power dynamics of the field and your experiences, and ultimately how do we grapple and decolonize some of this work.
Thanks, Graham. Some big topics to focus on there. And thanks for the invitation to speak. I am really honored to be on a panel with Mireille and JC. And as you said at the beginning, our pre-call was so interesting, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we have today. So I will tell you about my role. So I actually started my job in lockdown, which is quite exciting. I work for a company called Palladium, which is actually quite interesting because it's a private company that does international development work, mostly funded by the UK government. So the Department for International Development gives us grants to be able to do international development and humanitarian work across the world, as do other governments. The Australia government and the US government also do give us quite a lot of money. And it's really interesting because I've spent the past 10 years or so working for NGOs, as Graham said, for actually Jewish and Israeli humanitarian NGOs. So I wanted to speak on both those points, which are quite different, and really do build on what JC and Mireille have said as well, and maybe give some examples from my experience in the field. So I work right now in London. I work for a project that's funded by the UK government. It's an 80 million fund, and we support higher education and vocational training programs in 9 different middle-income countries. And one thing that I have found really interesting in the past few months since working for the organization is that we are in a quite interesting time from a UK perspective, where DFID, the Department for International Development, is joining with the Foreign Office, as probably some of you have heard about in the news. And my project is actually co-funded by DFID and FCO, the Foreign Office. And what that means is that there's this quite interesting dynamic that's happening at the moment, where foreign aid is slightly starting more and more to be linked to foreign power, and having this understanding that those linkages are going to really have an effect on where we give aid as a country, how we give it, and also what kind of dynamics there are and what kind of benefit there is for the UK. So, for example, trying not to be political and bearing in mind that I am working for my current role. As an example, we work for a project in Kenya with Kenyan organizations. And the Kenyan Ministry of Education came to us and said that they really want to create an open university of Kenya so that they can have distance learning, so that education is more accessible, that it can be more equitable, that people can really learn and have a higher education degree, but can also probably work on the farm or keep their pastoralist traditions going in Kenya. And so we're in a really interesting position to be able to support this project, which is really exciting. But because our project is funded by DFID and FCO, there's a part of our program that has to benefit the UK. And we give the Kenyan program about £8 million, which is quite a lot of money. But some of that money has to, in some ways, come back to the UK economy, whether that's with soft power by building those relationships between Kenya and the UK, or whether that's by making sure that the Open University of UK can benefit by providing expertise to the Open University of Kenya. And so this example can become really complex. And as Mireille alluded to before, when we're trying to measure impact, we, in our project, have to measure the impact that this program has to reduce poverty and increase accessibility to education. But we also are having to measure how this benefits the UK, which can be really problematic, although it can also increase trade opportunities. In a post-Brexit world, maybe that's a good thing. But there's many dynamics that are happening, and I think it's really interesting to think about those when we think about our role in the UK, but also our role when we look at the funds that we as individuals give to NGOs when we see a disaster or we see a poverty reduction campaign that we want to support. And what are we giving to, and how does it work, and what sort of dynamics are at play? And as Mireille mentioned at the beginning, the power dynamics really become at the forefront of development work. And I think it's really important for us to have these critical discussions like the one we will have today, where we really look in depth at some of those dynamics and we really think about how we're doing this work. And it's all very well that we can give £8 million to Kenya and it will really benefit the country, but is there a cost to that aid that we're giving? And the other thing I wanted to mention, I know we've only got a few minutes for our introduction, but is from a different perspective, which was from my experience in the last few years working for IsraAid, which is an Israeli NGO. So I was sent to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. And it was actually one of those situations where I got a phone call and I left a couple of days later to go to the emergency response. And what I found really interesting at the time and reflected on much later as well, is that no one from the organization, which by the way does great work, so they are definitely okay with me saying whatever I want about this because I've said it to them, so it's nothing controversial. But no one said to me, oh, Hannah, we know you have experience in this. Do you speak Spanish? And I actually don't speak Spanish, although I learned a little bit. And so I was being sent to a country where I didn't speak the language, where I'd never been before, and having to respond to an emergency and manage a team of national staff, where they were actually much more experts than I was. but I was being paid much more. I was considered a technical expert, which in some ways maybe I was. There's an argument there as well. But the focus, as Mireille was talking about, is really on this idea that because we are international and we're not from the place, we have this technical expertise and we can go and build capacity in the local community. And I think you can tell by the way I'm saying that I find it at some level very patronizing to local communities. And I think that that's really quite problematic. There are some really positive aspects. So I worked for a year and a half in Dominica, also after a hurricane. And my entire team was national staff, and they were fantastic, really brilliant, amazing professionals. All of them more or less older than me and more qualified than me in terms of their education and the master's degrees that they had and things like that. And many times we would have conversations about salary and pay, and the fact that I was the country director, that I was being paid my salary, but also being given a house to live in and my food expenses paid for, whereas the national staff, who were being paid less but were more qualified and much more experienced with a local context than I was or will ever be, were being paid less and having to deal with that at work. On the other hand, we had some really amazing experiences together as a team where I would share my experiences as a Jewish person, and they would ask me questions about why I didn't believe in Jesus, quite often. It's almost daily, actually. And we would have lots of intercultural exchanges. And I do think that there's a benefit for this global world that we live in, where we can have those different dynamics that we go around the world and we can share with each other. But for me, it's really important to just think about the power dynamics and the privilege that we have, and the fact that I can walk into any ministry in Dominica and immediately have a meeting with the minister, or at one point with the president of Dominica. And that is just purely because I was representing money by being the head of an NGO in the country, and by the nature, for most likely, for me being a white blonde woman, that was able to open those doors. And I think these dynamics and these challenges are something that we really have to be honest with each other about, and how we do this work without doing harm. And for me, my main goal doing this work is that I do obviously want to help in the world and to help reduce poverty, but I want to question every time I'm sent somewhere, or if I'm having a job, am I the right person or the only person that could be doing that? Is there someone from the community that is actually much better placed and more qualified to do that work? And I think not enough of us are having those conversations with ourselves. And it's a learning journey for me as well. And hopefully one day we won't need to have these conversations because there'll be an end to poverty. But in the meantime, we do really want to think about how we're doing this work well and what we can do together as a community to be part of this, especially as Jewish communities looking to the world and being an example. So that's all I'll say for now, and looking forward to hearing your comments. Thanks.
Hannah, thank you very much for your powerful honesty. I think that was really important, what you just said. So friends, 3 different perspectives on the issue, 3 really thoughtful and inspiring pieces of commentary to set the tone for this evening. Before we go into the breakout groups, I want to just lead on from what Hannah said and say that you know, this is a journey that we're all on, and OLAM has started to and is committed to grappling with this topic, and finding the right opportunities to work with all its partners over the coming months and years. This webinar is a really exciting moment for us in terms of really starting the conversation, and we are taking lots from it as OLAM. So thank you once again to our speakers. We're going to go into some breakout rooms now. Joe is going to allocate us towards them, and I would just encourage you to say hello to the other people in the room. Please do feel comfortable to unmute yourselves, and if you're comfortable, turn on your camera. one of the ideas of these webinars is that there is a little social element, there is a little opportunity to meet others, especially in this COVID landscape where we don't get that spontaneous opportunity anymore. And then if you feel comfortable, please just share your personal experiences and reactions with what our speakers have said. And we will come back together in 8 or 9 minutes or so, 10 minutes maybe, and have a little bit of a summary, and then we'll get back into the deep conversation. Joe, are we ready to go?
Yep, ready to open all rooms. Speakers, you're allocated to rooms. If you're unable to join, then just press leave, don't worry about it. But if you'd like to join the conversation, then please do. I'm going to open them all now, and everyone can accept. If you want to also put your video on for your breakout rooms, just for that bit, so the participants can interact and talk to you. I think that's good. I wasn't sure if the speakers wanted to go into breakout rooms, but I left it as is. And I made sure that there was enough people in each one to...
All good, all good.
I'm just going to pop salute. Everything's going really well. Really happy with the conversation. Are you all right?
Yeah, we're good. We're a bit behind schedule, but it's just important to let them speak and let it flow. And when we come back, it'll be fine.
Yeah. All right, I'll be right back.
Ariel, you all right?
I'm leaving, Graham, but this was really fun. I just left my breakout room and they returned me to you and Joe, but I'm off.
No worries.
But it's a really cool event. Thank you.
Nice to see you. Hope you're good.
Yeah, I'm really. This must be your new role. For OLAM. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Are you well also?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, can't complain. Can't complain.
Where are you in London? Is that
I'm not in London currently, but I am still living in London. Yeah.
Oh,
just doing this call from somewhere else tonight, but that's what it
Okay,
is.
fine, perfect. Bye. In a bit.
Bye.
We just launched our JW3's Big Night In.
Yeah.
Tracy Ann Oberman, Stephen Fry, Boy George, Mark Ronson, Imelda Staunton, and Jim Carter. It's a bit mad. It's just like mad. Adam Kay.
That's an amazing lineup.
It's crazy. I was like it's all the people that I want to have at my events, and then everyone just comes to the Big Night In.
Of course.
But I'm looking forward to Mark Ronson.
Yeah, definitely. What's the format? Do they all have their own slot, or are they all in?
I think so. I think it's a big variety show.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I think that's what it will be like. I think various peeps doing different things. I think Tracy Oberman is hosting it. But that's what fundraising events look like these days.
Mm-hmm. I think we've got like 33 people on this call.
Yeah, I think 32 or something. Yeah.
Mm.
I'm really glad people seem to be really engaged.
Yeah.
I think the email made a difference.
For sure.
Well, who knows? Various things made a difference.
I'm also glad it's not that nice an evening.
Yeah, very rainy.
Yeah. Is there a timer on the breakout rooms? Because I think they went in at like 10 past.
I think they went in at about 12 minutes past, so I'll cut them off at 20. Does that work for you in terms of timings?
Yeah, let's do 19. Let's just,
and then give, okay, yeah, cool.
let's try and make the sharing of breakout rooms choppy.
How long do you want me to do it?
10 minutes. Like, let's try and let's don't have half, because then we've only got half an hour left for the main discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll try and at half past.
So am I asking kind of like, I would love everyone to share
just a few words.
Just a few words about maybe experiences you've had of these dynamics, or kind of points that were made in your breakout rooms that you found interesting to bring into the discussion.
Yeah. Do the second bit. Don't ask people to share their experiences in. Yeah. Just like, please share some of the interesting points that came out in your discussion, if you feel comfortable.
Yeah.
How many breakout rooms are there?
There are 7 breakout rooms.
Each with like 4 or 5 people in?
Yeah.
Mm. Okay, I'm going to Lou quickly. I know that there's like 1 minute left, but.
Okay, go for it.
I'm back. That was.
I close there. That was quick.
Yeah, close it.
Welcome back, everybody, from your breakout rooms. I know when nobody leaves their breakout rooms early, the conversation must have been good. Yes, it was, Phyllis. Good, brilliant. I'm glad. Well, I expect you to share in the conversation now. So I'd love for a few minutes for us to share just insights about the conversations that you were having with your group. What are the key points that you feel either you shared or better, one of your kind of friends in the group shared? If you want to wave at me or raise your hand, or you can raise your hand virtually, and we can hear from you. So if you want to tell us a little bit about what have you learned, but also kind of what do you want to add to the conversation now going forward?
Joe, David Wilkins had a raised hand.
Great, let's unmute David. David, welcome. Good to see you.
Hi, good to be here. We were talking about how partnerships with the local and the international people ought to work. We didn't get as far in it as any of us wanted to, I think, but essentially we were saying a real sign of it working is where you should only have people who are sent there who have an understanding of the culture, have an idea of the language, have an idea of the background they're going into. Otherwise, you spend the first few weeks when you really need to be getting stuck in, trying to work out how it all works, A, B, C, D, how do they do things, who does what, who's in charge, how does this particular group function as a society. If you're parachuted in, we're not saying it can't work, but it's very difficult for both groups because you're trying to get to know each other, which is wonderful. But if there's a real disaster going, do you have the time? And one of our one of our group members said that we needed to. She felt it was better if someone local with that cultural background was the person who was put in charge of it.
100%. Thank you so much, David. The efficiency of getting people on the ground from that culture to engage. And we're really good to see you here. David's one of our regular members at JW3 when we're open. So really glad to have you online with us today, David.
You're embarrassing me now. I'm not here. It's my ghost.
I'm going to mute you. Don't worry. Don't worry. Let's hear from someone else about what they shared in their breakout room. Maybe from someone from a different breakout room from David about their conversation. Go on, David was the first one to jump out and brave the scary depths of Zoom. Add your voice to this conversation. Oh. Phyllis. Oh, Nicole. Okay, great. Good to see you. Also one of our regulars.
So thanks. No, Phyllis, go first, if you'd like.
Phyllis is shaking her head very vigorously. So Nicole, it's up to you now to take us forward.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so I had a nice chat with Phyllis and Hannah from ASYV, and yeah, really interesting to hear about the work. And yeah, one thing which I found really interesting, so Phyllis mentioned that when people go to Rwanda, to the village to help, it's important that they're just aware of the cultural context, and when they use words like elevator pitch, that's not really used over there. So adjusting the language a bit to make sure that everyone there understands, maybe speaking a bit slower if English is not their first language. Yeah, and also she mentioned painting. If you help paint sheds, you're taking away those jobs from people locally, so you just have to be very sensitive and careful with those things. So it was interesting hearing how ASYV navigates those things.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nicole. Good to hear from you. Let's take a couple more points, and then Graham will lead the big chunk of this conversation, and we'll hear more from our incredible speakers with their incredible experiences. Feel free to just unmute yourself and go for it. Joey and Lauren, you're giving me a thumbs up.
No, we just didn't know how to do the raise hand picture because we're old. We actually had an interesting conversation. We had a nice catch up with two people that Lauren knows well, Steph and Joe. But actually, we touched upon an interesting thing that Steph was asking about, how to frame these experiences on CVs and resumes. In and of itself, an interesting conversation, but relevant here, actually, we were just discussing, because I think a lot of care needs to be taken, not just how we frame it for ourselves, but also how it might look externally, in terms of, are we trying to promote something we've done? Yes, but if we are promoting it in a way that looks in some way neo-colonialist, or in some way that is inappropriate, then that can actually have adverse effects. And so when we're trying to actually figure out how to, I guess, you know, what you do on a CV is promote or position ourselves. When we're trying to promote the work we might have done in the field, there's actually layer upon layer of complexity there, both in terms of how we actually present it to people who may not have heard of a Jewish NGO organization at all, for example, but also in terms of like what this means in terms of, is what we did not wrong, but how can we present that in a way that feels balanced? And we don't have an answer, but it's an interesting conversation.
Thanks so much, Joey. That's really insightful, and I think I hadn't thought about that way of kind of framing when you're talking about your own experience to other people. Let's take one more point before we jump into the main conversation. I'm sure someone else has something really insightful to add. Amazing, Yael. Good to see you again.
You too. So it was interesting in the conversation we had, just thinking about how we have benefited from this system that, as was mentioned, like we could afford going on a volunteer program or study abroad and then studying international development and making the choice that this will be our career. But as we move forward in this career, looking back and realize how maybe the choices we made were not the most ethical. And so just looking at it from a perspective of, okay, we're in it, we're committed to this line of work. So it's less about like not entering this field or thinking about, you know, positions that may be better taken by someone local who knows the context, but kind of what are the questions we should be asking while we're already in this and have benefited from that system. So that's definitely something I struggle with. And knowing that these short-term volunteer programs in the developing world really do spark, you know, people to do a lot more good in the rest of their lives. How do we, you know, both encourage young people to go on these types of programs, but also do it in a way that is not harmful and, you know, they don't take away from the people who they're trying to help. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Yael. I really appreciate that insight. But also kind of the idea of looking in, and even when you're in the field of international development, it kind of reminds me of the approach of what's coming Rosh Hashanah, kind of like of thinking and analyzing what you're doing and changing for the coming year. So let's move forward. I want to just say before Graham jumps into the main bunch of this conversation, that if you want to ask a question, you want to make a point, but you don't feel comfortable to share it in the kind of main space. This is a really like comfortable, friendly space, but please feel free to just message it to me on private chat, and I'll make sure that question gets to Graham and the speakers. So you can either later on ask questions by just saying to me out loud, or you can message me privately. But let's go on to Graham to lead the rest of this conversation and learn more from our speakers.
Thank you, Joe. And I just want to thank everyone for sticking with us. We've got another half hour left planned. I know that Zoom fatigue is a thing. And I know that, you know, after 6 months of lockdown, we're all a bit sick of staring at small people in small boxes on small screens. But hopefully the next half hour will be interesting and valuable. So please do stick around. I want to pick up from Yael, and I'm going to start off our speakers with a controversial question, which is, you know, after everything that we've already discussed this evening, with all the systems of power in play, and bearing in mind that, you know, because of the pandemic, travel has been restricted greatly. You know, no volunteer programs have gone from the British Jewish community have gone out anywhere in the last 6 months. Should volunteers, you know, when travel returns, should volunteers be going out at all? And if so, why? So JC, Mireille, Hannah, I'd love to hear your responses to that, and how we might take that forward. And yeah, I encourage all three of you to unmute and, you know, jump off each other where you can. Does anyone want to start us off? Hannah?
Sure. So we were actually discussing in our small breakout group some interesting points, but all three of us in the room had actually done some volunteering or volunteerism in different ways, and we were reflecting that at some level, if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have had our eyes opened, we wouldn't have necessarily gone into different work that we're doing. And I think certainly for me, in my work, I was often in a position where I was thrown in, for example, in the Philippines when I was just 23, and was told to manage 12 partner NGOs with very little experience, really. But being able to do that work that was, at the time, it was like an internship sort of fellowship program, enabled me to get the experience in the field, as they say, in order to get all the jobs that I've had since then. And so there's definite benefits for me that I've been able to have those experiences. But I do think it's really problematic to have had that entry into the development world. And we were talking about how perhaps if people have specific skills, that can be really beneficial for volunteering. So after an emergency, if someone is an engineer or a water and sanitation expert or a psychologist, then that can be really helpful if they have free time to give, to be able to go and support an emergency, if there's a really tangible skill. And sometimes there may not be, for example, enough doctors to respond to all the needs after a big disaster. And so it is helpful to have people join and to build systems back and to be able to just add value in that way. But I think anyone who's going to volunteer who is not skilled and doesn't have anything to offer in that way, I personally think shouldn't be going, and should rethink how they want to spend the money that they would spend on flights, and perhaps give it to the organizations directly, and many other ways that you can help add value. But to really think about what your motivations are. And we mentioned at the beginning this idea of a savior complex. And I think that we do really want to help, and we want to, in some ways, be really altruistic and to help support when we see things. But if we're going to save the world in our 1 week visit, then I would say, please do not do that. You will definitely do more harm than good, and so that's my opinion.
Thank you.
Can I just add a couple of things to that as well, Graham? I think, yeah, I totally agree with all of the things that Hannah have said. And I think, again, when I go back to this issue of power, you know, like, so I am from one of those developing countries that we love to talk about, right? Like of those southern developing, underdeveloped countries. I have done volunteering in my country and other countries and so on. So I don't think that that's necessarily the problem is volunteerism, is that shifting of power. You know, it's like, if we're going to volunteer and we're going to get this experience and we're going to, why can the other person not do it? I mean, there are enough problems in our societies that person can also learn from, but they don't have the money to get up, I don't know, a ticket to the UK, for example, if we're talking about the UK or the US or whatever. And you know what, the visas, to take a visa from someone from Nicaragua into the US, it might take you like 2 years. So all of those privileges that we might have are what are enabling us to be able to become what we are becoming. And I think that's what I was saying earlier. It's about structure. It's about power structures, systemically speaking. And that's why the sector is not it's not guilt-free. You know, when I went to university in my country, I wanted to be an aid worker. I wanted to be an international development worker. But guess what? That's not something that we study at university. I mean, there is no academic path to go into international. So I had to come to the UK to do that. So it's even from that, from if you say to someone in Nicaragua or Cuba, oh yeah, I'm doing a master's in humanitarian emergency response, what are you talking about? Because they are not donor countries, right? So I think it's about that, it's shifting the way things are done, not just at organizational level, but at systematic level, at the humanitarian sector level. And when it comes to volunteerism, I also agree, I'm afraid I also agree with Hannah, there are ways and ways of doing volunteerism. There are more harmful ways, I think, than good ones. And in my experience, I've only seen a couple of good volunteerism programs, and they have mainly been with BSO. I don't know if you're familiar with them. It's the Volunteer Service Overseas. It's a British NGO, which actually gets volunteers that are experts on something. And then that way you kind of like, and they stay for a minimum of 6 months to be able to have some sort of impact. And they also have a younger people volunteering program, which again, I actually think it works because it goes both ways. Actually, they changed that, the UK government changed that. But it used to be that volunteers from the countries where they kind of exchange countries. So like if it was like 2 or 3 weeks, you would exchange country, and then they will come to your country as well to learn of other programs. And I think when you do that, that's a bit better. There's another benefit. When it's a 1 week, 2 week, here I am, I'm gonna paint, I'm gonna build a toilet. Really? I mean, there are people in those countries that can paint, that can build a toilet, that doesn't need you to spend your money to come and do that. And I think that's where I stand on.
Absolutely, thank you. JC, you've got the last word on this.
Wow, it's tough to speak after ladies, Hannah and Mireille. But in my country, there is something that I always reflect on. We call it like homegrown solutions. And this is something that was revived after the genocide 26 years ago. And so how do we cope with our own situation? How do we cope with our own problems? How do we deal with it? How do we learn to rebuild ourselves? How do we learn to become good neighbors when we once sort of one group killed another group? And so all of these are solutions that Rwandans went deeply inside to think of for themselves. And the reason why I'm saying this is I don't think there is anybody in this world who can love me more than I should be loving myself. And so if somebody is going to come to help me or to assist me, I first need to know, what do I want? Where am I going? And then this person who is volunteering, whether it's for a week or for a year or for 5 years, I've been working for Agahozo-Shalom for nearly 10 years. I don't think I'm anywhere close to where I would want to be. And so I can see how it's becoming even harder for somebody who is coming to the village for like 3 weeks to 3 months or for a year. Changing a mindset, changing our behavior, or changing a thinking approach, or whatever you want to change does take time, but it cannot be done without the willingness and the understanding of the person who is being supported. So something that is critical for anyone who is volunteering is, first, you must try to understand context, the culture, and what drives the people you are trying to support before you can even pretend to say you want to bring in you bring in a solution. It won't work. So you see it in many countries where there is a intervention. It doesn't work. I think We are hearing of a coup, I think, in West Africa, Mali today or yesterday, and because there's also a mixture of so many people involved, and the people within the country are not able to think of their own solutions themselves. So I truly believe that each person, whether you're the person who is being assisted, must have your own goals. Whether it's a group of people or an individual, you have to have goals, and then people build on these goals to help you get to the outcome that you have defined for yourself. Yeah, so that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, JC. So one of the things that's really coming to me from what you're saying is the particular use of language, and all of you have spoken about volunteers. I want to ask a question of you about language in a minute, but I do just want to encourage everyone else on the call that if you do have a question, please put it in the chat, and we're gonna come to those in a few minutes. For me, around volunteerism, there's something about, for example, the trip that I went on to Rwanda in February, we didn't go out as volunteers, we went out as tourists effectively, and we went just to learn. And I think that there's something about learning trips, like reframing the language to be a learning trip so that people can, go out and have ultimately what is going to be a short experience, only to learn, not to do any harm whilst they're out there. And there's a lot of complexity in there, but to then be able to come back and build on that learning and be ambassadors of that learning. So my question to you is about, and Hannah, come in on this in one sec, my question to you is about language, but what other tips maybe can you give us about the language that we use when we're talking about not just volunteerism, but the issues of power and saviorism and so on?
Sorry, Hannah, were you wanted to go mean, or you?
I was going to answer the previous point, if that's okay, Graham.
Go for it.
It's just a quick point. I wanted to say that I think those kinds of trips, I could be definitely more convinced by them if they were reciprocal. And I have a really good example in mind of a teacher program where there was teacher training happening in Ghana with SEDEC. And not only did UK teachers visit the Ghanaian schools, but the Ghanaian teachers came to the UK and visited the UK schools. And the learnings that came out of that trip were really amazing to see. And both of the teacher groups reflected on how they had a lot to learn from each other. And that, for me, is a really great way to be able to do that. It does also have its challenges, and there's lots of cultural things to think about and many issues. But I think that that is a really strong, powerful way to promote these different partnerships that we've been talking about throughout this conversation.
And just add, Graham, in terms of, I'm not sure I quite get the question, but you're saying about language, right? Or how, I mean, for me, things should be called what they are, right? So, and when I was saying about structures and changes earlier, it doesn't matter how you call it, if the dynamic's still there, it will still be what it is, right? So even if you're, I don't know, I'm not sure if I'm getting the right interpretation of the question, but you're saying that if you think that if you were calling it a learning experience trip, would that be more appropriate than calling it volunteerism?
I was simply making the point that trips that only go out to learn are better than trips that go out with this idea that, oh, we can make a difference. And so therefore, by not calling them volunteering trips, we use better language around them. And that's quite important in the context of the British Jewish community, where there are a number of trips that would be going out in 2020 and next year if it wasn't for the pandemic. So
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's more about like, what is it that you're trying to learn? And do you really have to go to, I mean, there's poverty in the UK. You can learn about poverty in the UK. In London, you can learn about poverty. There's poverty in Italy. There's poverty in France. And they are much cheaper trips than going into Uganda or whatever. Poverty doesn't have to be Black. And so a lot of the time, there is this conception that you're going into this developing world because you're going to learn, you're going on a journey of poverty. Well, we can learn that here, and it looks different, and it has a different color. So I that's why I'm not sure. I mean, that's my personal view. Obviously, this is not the view of my organization, perhaps. I'm sure they will agree, but this is how speaking as a person of color, speaking as a person that comes from these countries where people go in and have a journey to learn. Actually, I've learned so much about poverty and inequalities in this country, without having to go abroad. So it depends what you want to learn, if you want to enjoy, I don't know, Rwandan food, and yeah, of course, well, best place. Actually, London is quite good for that as well. But it's you can go to that country. It's different. Depends what we're talking about that we're learning, I would say.
Absolutely.
Also, yeah, I really agree with that. And I think, let's be honest in this conversation, when we're talking about Jewish organizations that want to do these kinds of trips, it's, I would say, most often about building Jewish identity through social justice or through visiting people where you can build that Jewish identity. And in the most cynical way, and I've heard this from donors that fund those trips, is that they want to build this Jewish identity because millennials and young people really care about social justice, and we want them to really think about staying within the Jewish community and not leaving the community. And they're not going to go to synagogue, but maybe we'll put on a trip. And I think that is it's hugely problematic. And now that I don't work in the Jewish community, I maybe can say that more easily than previously. But I really do believe that is a massive challenge that we should all be thinking about. And yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate your honesty and explicitness. JC, we haven't heard from you for a couple of minutes. I'm wondering if you wanted to comment on this.
I think for me, really, if you would like to help, it has got to be meaningful for the person you're assisting. That's, whether it's for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, it could be just an idea, as long as it is meaningful. Anything that is only for you to go back and say, oh, I had a great trip in Africa and I saved the world, then that's for you, and if that makes you happy, then that's fine. But it has got to be meaningful for the person, the recipient, that you added value to this person's life. Otherwise, to me, it's meaningless, whether it's 5 minutes or 10 years. Yeah.
Absolutely, thank you. Friends, we have about 11 minutes left. I'm conscious that there are 20 other people on the call. So thank you once again for coming. At this point, I want to transition over to hear some questions from the audience for our speakers. This conversation has not happened so much before in the Jewish community, and I think it's a great opportunity. So please, if you have something bubbling in your mind, now's the time. Feel free to unmute or write it in the chat.
I'll share a question that I've got here. So there's an element of a huge number of different crises happening throughout the world currently. And social media ask us to act quickly and act now. And I wanted to just hear from the panelists what your personal approach is when you see things online that say, act now, donate to this organization, when you don't know what the organization necessarily, their approach to development is. How do you balance that need for acting now versus kind of actually spending the time, researching, prioritizing? For someone who isn't in this world of international development, I think that it's probably really would be interesting to hear.
I'm happy to go, but I don't know if anyone else. Yeah, I think it's an important and useful question, and yeah, it is good to know. I mean, ideally, people normally have like the charities, you know, that they might resonate with them. And I think in my experience, that's normally how it happens, right? Like you either through family or through your own personal interest, you might have that link with a particular charity. What I will say is, it is important to know who you are giving to and how they're working, but often there are a lot of the charities put these events on to share how they work, what are the operational and logistical strategies, how do they work, whether they work with partners or not, whether they deploy, whether they ship things or send volunteers. And I think to get to know the charity or the organization that you might want to donate, it is important. And especially because, you know, no one, you know, like, it's kind of like drowning on money. So you really want to make sure that your money is going in the right place. And I mean, of course, social media will put that out there, you know, act quickly, and it is actually needed quickly, especially when it comes to emergencies. But I think reach out, you know, normally reach out to the charity, call, ask questions, you know, even if it's on that same date and you might donate later on, 2 hours, 5 hours won't make a difference. But say, I don't know, if we're talking about World Jewish Relief, for example, say, oh, can I speak to Mireille, please? Or, and for sure someone will put you through to me, or you will say someone in the organization, what is it exactly that you're doing? Who are you working with? And it's good to question. It's good to question charities. It's good to question things. And I can't speak for all charities, but for sure at World Jewish Relief, I know that we have a very close relationship with most of our supporters, and they know who everyone is. So do ask questions, because I think, yeah, it is important to know where things are going and how they're getting there.
I can add as well. So I think it's really interesting because in my experience responding to disasters and working with those donors, there's usually a big surge, and Mireille, I'm sure you've seen this as well. There's an appeal and there's a big surge and money comes in, and then 1 year later, 2 years later, the place is not necessarily rebuilt and there's little interest once the media stops showing interest, essentially. And I would say that if you are really passionate, then you should be giving regularly, even small amounts, and have a direct debit that can go out of your account so that the charity knows where the money is coming from, and that in 2 years' time, after the earthquake response money has dried up, there's still income coming in that can still go to support that. And the disaster response work really is only starting 6 months after, when the initial response has happened and relief has been given, and all the food cans and tarpaulins and things like that have been given. But actually thinking about community resilience and more long-term support to help the communities rebuild is a long-term project, and then does feed into long-term development if there's underlying inequalities and poverty. And so having to think more strategically about how you're giving and not just reacting, which I think is what we often do when we see the media, is I think one of the most important things that I've learned being on the other side and working with those donors, and being able to educate the donors that, you know, you're even like, I don't know, £500 is really helpful at the beginning, but it will be really helpful if you gave that actually in 2 years' time, and we could do something really strategic and really build that resilience within the systems, rather than just give a few tins of food now. And so I would encourage everyone to think about it like that as well, especially in disaster response.
Thanks so much, Hannah and Mireille. I've got a question, an anonymous question from one of our members of our group. And it's kind of talking about that element of starting this work with a problematic trip. Like a lot of people start this work or end up in this work starting with a trip that may have not been the right thing to do. How do we move on from that? How do we kind of learn about that? And what keeps you wanting to? I guess this is for Hannah in some way, but also for Mireille and JC, kind of what you see. What pushes you to continue pursuing such work, and how do you learn from those mistakes?
I could start, but I've been speaking a lot, so I don't know if JC, you want to answer this question first.
So I think I did not get exactly the essence of the question. I'm sorry. Like starting the trip in the sense of.
I guess the question is, as far as I understand it, is when people start their journeys into international development as young people, they go on trips that aren't always perfect, that have a negative effect. So how do you as international development professionals balance that constant need to learn and constant need to assess your actions and see if they're actually effective and see what systems there are to learn anew each time? And do you have those systems built in place, I guess, to always be learning?
It's a complex one. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can say a few things based on my personal experience. And I think what it comes back to for me is about going back to education. And I think we've all shared here tonight some really key points that I hope people are really listening to, because there's some great experts in the room here. And really to think about why you're doing the work, to think it even in terms of racial justice, and to think about, you know, giving up your power that you have or your privilege that you have. And I question all the time if I should be doing this work and what added value I have in my work. And some days I think, okay, well, today actually I really shouldn't have been doing this job. And some days I think, oh, actually I had a unique perspective on this that really helped, or I was able to build a relationship with a donor who then was able to give £1 million or whatever. And I think that it's about that critique that you have and of yourself and of the sector, and to constantly be questioning and constantly reviewing and evaluating. And I would encourage people to learn more about this work. And if it's possible, Joe, we could share around some links. There's some really great things online. And a few of us actually in this room have started a WhatsApp group if anyone wants to join to discuss these issues. And we talk a lot about the ethics of development and humanitarian work and race and racism in the work and all kinds of things. But I think there's so many ways to learn. And I think if you're interested in this work, you have to first learn and think about whether you should be doing it, or if there's your USB that could actually really help that. I've been working out in this sector for 10 years, and I've definitely learned some things which can really benefit. And I think if there's a way to build that partnership and to do this thing really well, then I want to be at the forefront of doing it. And I will definitely fail at different points and I'll do things wrong. But if I'm open and honest with myself, and if others are open and honest with me, I think that's really important. And I can share a personal example of a colleague in Dominica, after a meeting with one of the ministers in Dominica, came into my desk and said, can we have a chat? And he was really upset with me for something that I'd said in the meeting. And I was his boss, so it was quite risky to do that. But I think that the relationship that we had built over that time meant that he challenged me in a really fundamental way. And I was able to reflect on that and to have that humility to be able to say, you're right, I shouldn't have done that. And this is how we can move forward. And to really appreciate those voices in your ear that are actually telling you those things. Because it's not easy to do, but I think if you can encourage people to critique you and everything around you, then you can hopefully not go wrong as much.
Thank you.
I have a question. I have to ask, because having no sight, I have problems writing in the chat. I'm sorry. I want to ask, as a disabled person, I've often been encouraged to go out to places, although I've not ended up going in the end because it can't be afforded, on the grounds that as a disabled person, the people who are running the trip really want me to come, on the grounds that it would really encourage people in less developed countries, that disabled people are able to do more than they believe. I've always been a bit uncomfortable with that idea because I'm a disabled person from a middle-class family in the UK. What do I know about living in an African village where, as a disabled person with no sight, you really have very little opportunity and you're given very little chance to prove you are more than just someone who can't milk the cows or milk the goats or help with the crops. But at the same time, I'm aware that if people like me don't go, that's something they're not going to hear. I mean, is it worth thinking about me going as almost an ambassador for disabled people if I don't belong to the culture and don't speak the language? I feel a bit of a fraud doing that.
David, thank you so much for your, firstly, really valuable personal testimony, and also your question. I'm gutted that we're at 9 o'clock, and that ultimately we have kind of run out of time in this discussion. I think that clearly, as I said at the beginning, there's so much to talk about in this area of work that we were never going to fit it all into an hour and a half anyway. So I want to take this opportunity before it gets too late to firstly just thank our speakers a huge amount for spending their time, not just tonight, but in all the preparation I asked them to do to help us put on this evening as well. I'm conscious that David has asked a really important question, and there were also other questions that we didn't get to. I think our commitment is that we'll try and get some of the responses to those questions from our speakers and put them in an email to everyone, or some kind of communication to everyone that's here, along with the resources that Hannah mentioned and some other useful things following this conversation, and send it to you as soon as we can. I do just want to finish by saying OLAM's annual conference is in October, on the 14th to 15th of October. You can sign up now. Everybody who is interested in this topic is welcome to attend. And there is a discount rate for young professionals. So the link's in the chat now, and you can also find it on the OLAM website. So once again, please join me in thanking Hannah, JC, and Mireille. We really appreciate it. And I'll leave it to Joe and the JW3 to have the last word and send us on our way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Graham. Thank you to Mireille, Hannah, and JC. Your words were incredibly inspiring and informative, and I think we should all take those into how we think about the way we try to impact and try to support developing countries, and also our own countries going forward, in the poverty and issues within our own spaces, and see really how we should assess that impact and make the best impact we can. As I said before, JW3 are committed to having conversations like this, and we're really delighted to see so many people interested in conversations about global responsibility. And there are so many other conversations that we'll be having at JW3 coming up. And if you'd like to hear about them, please feel free to join our Facebook group, where we talk about all of these different things, and you have an opportunity to share what conversations you think we should be having in the Jewish community in the UK and also abroad. So I've sent the link onto the chat, our Young Professionals group at JW3 on Facebook. Join us. And if you have any questions about any other events, or you have any questions that you want me to pass on to our speakers, then please email me, joe@jw3.org.uk. And remember to check out our allyship workshop coming up in September. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night, and hope to see you all soon.
Everyone, nice to see you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I wanted to
Thanks,
say
Hannah.
just to see how it was for you guys.
No, it was great. It was great. And
Ansel's not actually there, I think. He's my boyfriend. We're listening at work.
Cool. Okay, glad. I was really happy with that. I'm really appreciative of that. We got some like good questions towards the end, and I think that question from David was really important. But yeah.
I'm there.
See you later.
Yes, it was quite innovative. Sorry that I couldn't participate too much. I'm at work actually, so I was just listening in. But quite informative.
This is Graham and Joe.
Hi Ansel, good to meet you.
How are you all doing?
You'll meet them.
How are you all doing?
See you later.
Yeah. All right, take care. Yeah.
I also have to jump off. Joe, I'll possibly.
I can jump off so that you guys can chat.
No, we're good.
But thanks so much for inviting me, and we'll speak soon.
Yeah, good to see you. Thank you so much, Hannah. Bye.
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 All right, see you, Graham. That was great.
Thank you.
Have a good wedding. Bye.
Toodaloo.